Professor Michael, can you share your screen?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, so shall we start? Okay, so welcome back everyone, online and offline. Right now, we're moving on with the session of Professor Michael Sankey. Professor Michael Sankey is from Charles Darwin University in Australia, where he is the Director Learning Futures and Lead Education Architect. And in addition to this role, Professor Michael is President of the Australasian Council on Open, Distance, and E-Learning ACODE. He specializes in emerging technologies, enhanced learning, curriculum renewal, e-learning, quality, multimodal design, digital, visual, and multiliteracies. Michael has worked in higher education for more than 30 years at 5 universities and is particularly interested in how constructively aligned and aesthetically enhanced learning environments can better transmit concepts to students, particularly those from diverse backgrounds and those who study at a distance. Yes, Michael's on.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And
Michael, where are you? I mean,
hello?
Michael.
Hello there. You ready for me to start? Or?
No, we can't hear Michael. Michael, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
No, I can't hear you.
You could before. So what's happening? Okay.
While you're doing that, Michael, I just wanted to send out a big shout out of thank you to you for being here with us in Hanoi. While you sort out your sound.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
I can't hear you, Michael.
Wow.
Maybe your Bluetooth.
No, I'm not Bluetooth.
We have Sean Nickvist, who's in digital learning as well. And we have Karen is from RMIT, and she's in learning and teaching.
Can you hear me now?
Still can't hear you. Do you want to pop out and then go back in again, maybe?
Okay. Now, can't hear that?
Oh, yes. Turn it up, please.
Good.
Turn it up.
Okay.
Can you turn up the volume?
Okay, here we go. Testing. Hello.
We just heard you just a second ago there, Michael, but very faintly.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. We can hear you now. Okay. We can hear you.
Wonderful.
Yep. Can you switch up the volume more, please, ladies?
And hello. Hello from Darwin.
Hello from Hanoi. So that's just that's it. Okay, that's it. All right. Well, I did pop in to say hello. I've just got to go to another session, being the organizer of the conference.
Yes.
But I did want to send in my heartfelt thanks to you for joining us and for your time today. And I'll hand you over to the very capable Sean and Karen.
Wonderful. Thank you. So you ready for me to start? Okay, cool. Well, wonderful. Thank you for joining me today. And I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but I'm sitting up here in the very top of Australia in a place called Darwin, which is not that dissimilar climate-wise to Vietnam. So quite a humid climate up here. Not today, of course, we're in our dry season at the moment, so that's all very pleasant at the moment. But because I am in Australia, I do want to acknowledge the First Nations peoples across our lands and do want to pay respects to elders past, present. Well, what I'm going to cover today is rethinking how we deliver and assess in light of the current trends that have happened through things like COVID-19 and new models of hybrid delivery, etc. And in making these shifts, we've seen that in making the shift to online, we've seen that many of the goalposts associated with learning have been moved somewhat. And that is because of things like academic integrity and cheating versus authentic assessment. And also because, on a more positive note, we are preparing students for the world of work, and the way in which our employers are seeking our students to be skilled is not necessarily the way they were seeking to be skilled 20 years ago. And so the shift has partly occurred because of the advent of new technologies and what can be done in the online space now. And so these newer technologies, and we start to see a new suite of technologies emerging in higher education, we start to be able to reinvigorate different forms or older forms of assessment, but put a new veneer over them to make them actually really more contemporary. And so we'll look at some of these things, how the old can be made new again, particularly in terms of preparing our work, preparing our students for what they will expect to get in the workforce. So sometimes it helps if we can reinvent the wheel. Now, we're not talking here about totally reinventing the wheel, but we are talking about looking at what was and reworking where we're going with this. So let's think about, and to do that, we think about this notion of pedagogy, this notion of teaching. And this definition of teaching is about interaction between teachers and students and the learning environment and the learning tasks in and around that environment. Now, that is really very well suited to an online environment, but the word pedagogy has some very older connotations associated with it. So when we're really talking about pedagogical approaches today, we are talking about this notion of constructivism. That notion of constructivism has been around for, well, since the late 1950s, early 1960s, where learning, particularly for adults, is far more constructive, where we learn to construct meaning together. But really, when we're talking about this, we are talking about a much broader range of approaches that have developed over time. We've actually developed a far more authentic approach, or eclectic approach as well, to our pedagogies. So here I have a set of pedagogical golf clubs. So up the top left-hand side, and on that left-hand side, we're talking about learning strategies. So pedagogy, which is really a cover-all term nowadays for teaching. Then we have andragogy, which is a strategy around adult teaching. Pedagogy, which is really talking about where we're going with self-directed learning. And more recently, there's been this notions of paragogy, which is more to do with self-directed and co-construction of learning, particularly in the online spaces that we find ourselves in. On the right-hand side of this diagram, we have the theories that help to inform these strategies. And so I mentioned before constructivism, where we construct knowledge and meaning from experiences, and that's essentially what we're doing. But nowadays, we're talking also about socio-constructivism, and that is more around the social context, the cultural contexts in which we learn. Of course, then there is situated learning, that is acquiring professional skills while doing things like work integrated learning and things like that. And of course, connectivism. And connectivism, in a sense, has become far more prominent over recent years with pandemics and things happening, where we're starting to connect with our peers online far more. And of course, that's been happening in the workplace as well, with many people working from home now rather than actually in the workplace itself. And so associated with these strategies and theories, we also want to think about things like assessment. So, and collaborative and authentic and active learning. So when I'm talking about using pedagogies, I'm not talking about using the same one all the time. It's going to be different for a first-year student than it is for a third-year student or a postgraduate student. We actually have to find the clubs that best suit what we want to do. So I live just behind a golf course, and I know the first hole on that golf course is 160 meters long. So I know on that first hole, I'm going to use a 2-wood, and I'm going to hit that ball as far as I can, hopefully within QE of the hole, so I can then lob onto the green with a 6-iron or something like that, then putt out. The next hole, though, is only 180 meters long. So I'm going to try and get onto the green with a 5-iron and then try and putt out. Now, in this particular case, this word down the bottom here, assessment, assessment of, assessment for, and assessment as learning is the putter. And whatever my situation, whatever my teaching scenario, whether it be first year, second year, third year, postgraduate, I'm always going to be using assessment. And the trick is about making that now with this new focus on work integrated learning and things like that, far more active, collaborative, and authentic. So we've moved, we're not saying that we're going to get rid of in-class teaching. We're not saying that at all. In-class teaching has been here for centuries and millennia, and will continue to be a fundamental part of how we teach, but not all the time. And so it is worth, particularly where situations where COVID and other things happen, that we need to think about hybrid learning. Some think in terms of flipped classrooms, but it's a little bit more than that. But research over recent years, probably over the last 20 years really, has shown that hybrid learning can, not always, can provide some better engagement when designed properly. It provides more options for students in terms of being able to have where and how they can access their content. It provides a new flexibility to instructors, particularly at the moment where many instructors are working from home. It does increase our accessibility because there are a number of the tools we use online now have really good accessibility features like voice to text and transcripts and things like that for people that have disabilities, things that don't necessarily happen in the classroom. It does mean, of course, we can have some healthier campuses. That means we can more socially distance and things like that. It allows us to bring in many more people into our classrooms, guest scholars from different universities around the world, just like I am coming into you now from Darwin in Australia. It allows for the preparation for a hybrid workforce. Of course, that's what's happening right now in our industries, a hybrid workforce. And it also allows us to pivot again quickly. So once we adopt a hybrid model of approach to our learning, we are far more ready to pivot when need be. To do that though, we need to have a complete suite of tools ready and at hand for us to do this. So what we have in the middle of this contemporary technology, hence learning ecology, we call it, is this notion that there is a system or a suite of systems that are looking after things like curriculum management, student management, things like that. We call them student management systems and curriculum management systems. Here in Australia, you might have other terminologies for them. For decades, though, we've also had this notion that a learning management system, whether it be Blackboard, Moodle, Canvas, D2L, whatever it might be, there's a learning management system that has mediated learning. The problem now is that was great. That was fantastic 21 years ago when I was teaching web design and publishing online in an old Blackboard 4 environment. The learning management system was the latest cutting edge technology. Not necessarily now that doesn't necessarily hold that place in our psyche around technology, hence learning. It is important, but not necessarily as important as it was. What we are seeing is the increase of things like productivity and communication tools, things like Microsoft Teams, Google Classes, Slack, tools that we see people using in the workplace. And we've also seen them using them in schools. And so, but for a while, when we bring a student to work with us in a university, we put them in this contrived space called a learning management system. They'll never use them again, and they probably didn't use them before they came to university. But for some reason, we've held on to this notion of a learning management system being the center of our universe. It's not necessarily going to be the case in the future. So let's think about how we might think about our students actually being productive and not just empty vessels waiting to be filled. So we have things like content management systems, the things that allow us to provide the readings, the copyrighted materials and things like that. We have lecture capture systems and media streaming tools. We use a tool called Kaltura here as a media streaming service. We have things like e-portfolios and the way in which students can evidence what they've done to potential employers. Virtual classrooms, just like this one, whether it be Blackboard Collaborate, whether it be Zoom, whether it be Teams, virtual classrooms that we can interact with students in, present material and interact with them. Now, of course, all these systems, which we'd consider our core systems, have data associated with them that we want to grab to actually make the student learning journey more effective. On the outside of the circle, we have systems that we can grab some data from, but not very regularly. Things like our social media platforms, the web applications, web apps, and different educational tools that we use. There's open source materials held on different repositories all around the globe. There are the third-party streaming content services like YouTube, TED Talks, LinkedIn Learning, things like that. Then there are, of course, those professional identity tools that we promote the use of with our students, like LinkedIn and things like that. And of course, our academic integrity and writing tools, the Turnitins and the Grammarlys and the Studiosities, and all those different tools that help our students learn how to write better and to communicate better. But we get very little data from these systems. So if Henry Ford, this is obviously fictitious, this is what Henry Ford said last week, if he was alive. If I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said a better learning management system, a better LMS, because that's the paradigm we have known for the last 23 years that learning management systems have been with us. Higher education founded this notion of a learning management system, but haven't moved on from that notion. So let's take, for example, discussion forums. The times are changing, and we need to think and challenge some of the entrenched views we have. So our discussion forums that we love in our learning management systems are not loved by students on the whole, and on the whole, they're not loved by lecturers either. And yet we've held on to this notion of a discussion forum. I don't know anybody in the workforce who uses a discussion forum. So why are we training our students in the use of this when we could be using other more authentic tools? So this is just an example. I use this every day of the week. This is Microsoft Teams. I have 4 children, one of which is a lawyer, one of which is a media producer, senior media producer, one of which is a social worker, and another is a graphic designer, animator. All my 4 children and my wife, who's a psychologist, all use Microsoft Teams or tools like this in the workforce, productivity tools they call them, to communicate with their colleagues. We as a university are moving to embed Microsoft Teams within, be able to replicate the classes that we have in our Blackboard system in our Microsoft Teams sites as well. So this is just one of the things, and many universities in Australia are doing the same thing. So the other thing I want to really talk through is, okay, well, that's fine. We've got all these things online now, and we've got all these ways of communicating, and we've got all these tools to help the students find information and things like that. But what we've seen is that there is advances in what we call artificial intelligence in learning and teaching. Now, this can be good and it can be bad. Is artificial intelligence something that we need to be worried about? Well, yes and no. So the trick is here is not to panic about it, but what we do see is we see artificial intelligence being used for writing assistance. So tools where a student can go in online, put in some keywords, and basically be provided with an essay. So for example, if we had a piece of writing we're asking our students to do, and 49% of that bit of writing was created by an AI engine, and the other 51% was their own original content, would we consider that original work? I don't know about that. We have our Grammarly systems and other cloud writing tools that provide automatic text generation, extraction, prediction, mining, form filling, paraphrasing, etc. So a colleague of mine took his exam the other week and put his exam questions into an AI engine, and the AI engine answered every single question 100% correct. So that a student taking that exam could notionally go to an AI engine and get all the answers he or she wanted for that. So there are gaps in our systems at the moment, and particularly around when we're using pre-produced sets of materials. So many of our publishers, our major publishers of textbooks, also provide online sites and lots of support material. Well, AI engines love that stuff because they grab that stuff and they harvest that stuff and they use that as part of the knowledge base for the AI engine. And so when a student goes to buy an assignment from somewhere, which they do, they will be provided with a pretty good assignment. Not that you would know that it came from an AI engine because it's so well written. And so it allows us we need to think about how we tailor our exam questions differently. And we really, we need to be really, really interested in this space before it runs away from us. What we can't do is hide our head in the sand and pretend it's going to go away, or that somebody else is going to find the answer for us. What we need to do is actually create more authentic assessment items and authentic teaching environments. So AI is everywhere. So it's not just in education, of course, but it is in educational skills and learning. It is in innovation. It is in data science. It is in future of computing. In fact, it's in all walks of life. We see the use of AI. Does AI always get it right? So here I searched myself on Google the other day, and there was these pictures came up of me. And here's this picture that came up of me. It says Professor Michael Sankey and director, but that's not me, that's somebody else. It is in fact the Prime Minister of Australia, the new Prime Minister of Australia. And yet this AI engine thinks that's me. So AI doesn't always get it right. I'm also quite familiar with social media. I have many social media environments. I use Instagram as one of my social media outlets, and Instagram, these people followed me the other day, Assignment Solutions Network, and they were trying to sell me an assignment. Now, the Australian government is all over this. They're really concerned about this, and at the university, we block from our systems, from students in our college, in our learning, in our IT systems, we block about 1,281 sites, cheating sites. We know that are academic sites that provide assignments to students. We block those. And 84% of those came from TEXA, which is our quality agency over here in Australia, a tertiary education quality and standards agent. They gave us a list, and we've added to that list ourselves from things we know. So the only way that we can counter this is actually as we start to make our assessment more authentic. And I'll give you some examples of that in a sec. Does that mean dollars? It does in many cases, because we actually have to rework some of our teaching. And it also means that we have to help our academic staff, our teaching staff, have that meta understanding around how and why they're teaching, why they're teaching the way they're teaching, and particularly when it comes to using technology. And so one of the things we think about is this notion of technology mentors or assessment mentors, learning designers, digital learning designers, people who specialize in this form of work. One of the not so good sites around at the moment was this one called Course Hero, that they purport to be there to be helping students, but really what they're doing is selling assignments to students. So I mentioned before that we block 1,300 sites from the university at any one time. So and this is figures from our university, and in March this year, there were 7,533 attempts to get to cheating sites from within the university. 7,533 attempts. Now, in October last year, we hit our peak, and we had almost 10,000 attempts at getting to cheating sites, these known cheating sites, from within the university domain, IT domain. Now, 10,000 attempts, we don't even have 10,000 students on campus. So, there's a lot of students that this doesn't stop the students who are off campus getting to those sites. This is just the ones on campus. So let's look at typically what this is a graduate certificate in tertiary education, tertiary teaching. So this is a course that our teachers do. They might be employed as an academic, as a biologist or an engineer or a nurse, and they're going to be learning how to teach students doing a graduate certificate in tertiary education. So in this, they do 4 units. There's the effective teaching, there's technology enhanced learning, there's curriculum design. And what we see is essay, and presentation and reports. They are the easiest things to buy. Essays are one of the easiest things that students to cheat in. So half of this program, you could cheat your way through this program and pass the whole program just by passing these assessment items. They do have some other items, which is portfolio and blog posts and things like that. Now, blog posts can also be sourced through AI engines and things as well, but they're usually a bit more personal, so it makes it a bit easier. So, however, the point is, a student could quite easily, if they had the money, buy their way through this unit, this course, very easily. So what we need to think about, if we're thinking about more authentic assessment, what we are thinking about is more use of the human voice. We're talking about using images. We're talking about collaboration. We're talking about peer review. We're talking about using things like infographics and getting students to create things. We're talking about e-portfolios and reflections, and we're talking about work integrated learning. Now, there's a table there which you can't read properly, but it does come out of this article here, which I wrote earlier this year. And it's called The State of Australian Higher Education Post-Pandemic and Beyond, and it talks about authentic assessment, many of the things I'm talking about here. I'll give you a couple of examples out of this presentation. So one of the things we could do is get our students to create an online social media advertisement on a topic that they're learning. So here over the right-hand side, Sankey has developed a social media thing in Yammer we're using in this particular case, and has linked that to some other information that people go to about that assignment. So most students nowadays know how to use social media platforms, and they're pretty familiar with seeing ads on those platforms. So by students creating an image that encapsulates the concepts, and then particularly how they paraphrase the concepts in the post, whether that be presented in Microsoft Teams or Yammer or a closed Facebook site or an e-portfolio platform, doesn't matter. Could be using VoiceThread. VoiceThread's a fantastic tool for authentic assessment. It gives people the opportunity to not just put up the social media ad, but also to add a voice explanation to that. And so you're asking the students to describe that assessment item as well. You could do online brainstorming and sticky notes and things like that. You know, what we used to do when we're in the classroom and we used to paste the sticky notes on the wall and brainstorm, we can now though do that in OneNote or Padlet. We could do a shared document on Google. You get students to work in smaller groups over a period of time and brainstorm these different notions. It's like pasting those sticky notes on the wall, but online. And so they can then synthesize and pull that those concepts that are on the sticky notes on the online forum together to actually then create their assignment. Now, that because you've got the wall there, then that it is waiting. They have to be creating that assignment around what is on that wall, not around things that they're pulling off the internet. Then this is presented, the outcomes are presented as an activity, and then other students then could reflect on that, what the other students have done. So here is just an example of Padlet, where this is our education strategy Padlet site where we do our brainstorming as a team. And so in this particular case, we were looking at some different technologies that could be used in our learning and teaching. And so then we'd get the students to do the same thing. We'd get them to summarize what the lessons they've learned from this. So we might ask the students to do a description of a process as though presenting to a novice. So, the old elevator pitch. how would you present this concept to somebody who didn't know anything about this concept? Forget about the teacher, present it to somebody who you might have met in the hotel or whatever. And you do this, can be done synchronously or asynchronously. It can be done live if you want, through Zoom, Teams, Collaborate. But it's about the students presenting the ideas in a concise way. So they have to know the ideas, of course, to be able to present them in a concise way. They can do it in a recording. They can use their mobile phone to record themselves through providing these ideas. And that recording can be either put up in the LMS and Teams and the streaming media platform, whatever. Again, VoiceThread's a fantastic tool to do this with. The trick is to ask other students to ask questions to actually tease out the information that's not covered by the student. So student A gives the presentation, student B realizes from their learning that the other student might have missed something. So they ask a question through that, and that helps the students understand, or helps them to build on their understanding while doing this. It can be done like a role play or a fun activity as well. So VoiceThread works on this principle that it uses sound and images. Now there's buckets of research out there, not the least is this work by Dr. John Medina, where if you're using multiple senses in your learning environments, you do get better. It's much better than using single senses. So whether it's just reading or whether it's just listening, if you can use voice and visuals, the impact is far more is far stronger. And you might have heard in my the introduction of who I am. I'm very much into multimodal learning and the way in which we can use more authentic forms of presentation. So you could create a mind map, or an infographic or something like that, so that students, again, are paraphrasing what they want, the concepts of, one of the major concepts of this particular topic or module that you're studying, and they're presenting it as an infographic. Again, that can be accompanied by a description, whether in writing or audio. It can be presented in PowerPoint or Word, or, or something more sophisticated. Again, it could be using VoiceThread, it could be hosted in Teams, it could be done live in Zoom or Teams, and it could be pre-recorded again. This makes a particularly good peer review activity. So, example, just a very simple infographic of working through some content around the problem-based learning model. If you're an education student and you want to get somebody, education lecturer, and wanted to get to students to provide an infographic about problem-based learning, this would be an example of that. So you may be getting to write a poem or a play where there's a dialogue involved and things like that. Asking them to act it out, or to write it and to act it out. They can quite easily do that on Snapchat or an Instagram story. Doesn't have to be long. The shorter the better in some things, because it actually causes them to compress and to synthesize the knowledge that they're doing. It's about creating a dialogue, though, to get the concepts, to see the concepts from different angles, putting themselves in the different shoes, or in the shoes of others. A rhyming poem or an acrostic, it doesn't matter. That it's about how we process that information a little bit differently to what we would traditionally do, because this is what they're going to have to do when they get out of the workforce. Not necessarily write poems, but to start to process information in different ways. So they design a play for a group of students who might act that out on Zoom or Teams, etc. So simply a short poem about my teacher was half as nice as yours seems to be. So just an example of that there. Creating a policy memo. So many students are going to go out into the workforce and be involved in things like board meetings and team meetings and things like that. Well, we should be getting them involved in team meetings and board meetings now. They can do that through role play, and they're very much online now because a lot of the teams and board meetings are happening online. So they have to work as a team. They assume roles. They can pretend to be the CIO or the CFO, and they can take on roles associated with the types of businesses they might be going into. They could present a concept paper. They could post things into the Teams channel, just like we do in the workplace. Ideally, though, they want to have, as I mentioned, though, taking on those different roles. One might be the CIO, Chief Finance Officer, etc. But each one needs to see themselves through that lens and then present that back, and they take it in turns to take on those different roles. And so here's just what we do, don't we? We meet like this in board meetings, or is it more like that? Well, I think it's the first one, but anyway. And so here we are. We set up a team site for them, and we have meetings, and we get them to problematize the things that and solve some of the issues we have associated with that. So we just do that. This is for our technology enhanced learning advisory group. You know, we can post files in there, and there's a notebook, etc. And of course, we set up folders for meetings and things like that. Now, what I've just been saying, these examples are all contained in fuller form in this blog post here of mine, which is on michaelsankey.com. And you can see some of the authentic assessment items that I've put up in there if you're keen to go and investigate those. Importantly, here's the lecture on the right. Okay, they've got most of the head knowledge around the subject, but they may be missing some information about different forms of assessment, different newer forms of presenting materials. And on the left here, we might have a learning designer, instructional designer, that kind of person, and two heads are better than one. They can, by sharing and creating new ideas, you can actually become superheroes in your course design. So educational designers are great resources for you. So are your peers, and so are the students as partners, pedagogy. Students don't come to you empty. They actually come to you with life experience, and you need to be able to understand and be able to cater for that life experience as well. But most of all, be open to new ideas. So just in closing, we're now realizing that what was conceived as being good online learning is now being challenged by some of the newer, more student-centered approaches to learning and teaching, not the least of these being due to the technologies that have evolved to allow us to be able to be way more collaborative than we have been in the past. So thank you, and hope you appreciated that presentation. No, you need to use a microphone.
Thank you, Michael.
Slightly hear you, kind of hear you, yeah. No. Yep. Oh.
I think it's working.
Hi, Michael. This is probably better now.
Yes, much better. Thank you.
Your presentation really resonates with some of the work I've been doing. I can't argue with anything you've raised here. I've spent the last 2 years working as a professor of education in Norway, and these are similar things that we've been talking about there and discussing and arguing, and I think when it comes to assessment, nothing beats authentic assessment. The one thing I found was that a lot of academics want to have 1 billion pieces of assessment, and they don't really understand why they're trying to assess or what they're trying to assess. And often you'd be aware of some of the work with the backward mapping tools and stuff like that for assessment. So I try to get them to work with that. But one of the things that's resonated with me in the work I've done recently is trying to cut down the amount of assessment that students are doing and making it more worthwhile. Did you have any comments on that? I noticed you had, in the example you showed there was like 4 pieces of assessment. I went to the stage where I said a maximum of 3 pieces of assessment, 2 was preferable over 12 to 13 weeks.
That's right. So you might have noticed also that first bit of assessment only had a very low weighting on it. So now that is for the purposes of engagement. So that first bit of assessment by our regulations has to be done by the end of week 3. And if a student hasn't attempted that piece of assessment, they're unenrolled from the course. So it's actually a mechanism for engagement that we actually have to do for government reasons. So it is usually a small piece of summative assessment that, according to our policies, has to be run before what we call census date. That is the date in which students can unenroll before being penalised. So that's why they have that small piece of assessment, and it's usually a very quick blog post or something like that, but something to get the students engaged early in the course. And so it's about progression and things like that. So what I would say is, and you'd be familiar with the notion of constructive alignment, how we align the learning outcomes of our courses, our units, to the assessments that we offer. Now, most courses in our particular case might have, or units courses, might have 5 or 6 learning outcomes. Now, what we don't want everybody to do is to assess and assess and assess all those learning outcomes. We need to just assess the learning outcomes we have in such a way that we can be assured in ourselves that those students have gained the knowledge they need to sign, so we can sign off on that learning outcome has been achieved. Now, the more we can, and in many cases, of course, 1 or 2, 3 learning outcomes can be assessed in 1 or 2 particular assessment items. So it's actually helping our academics understand the relationship between learning outcomes and assessment, and being able to create, and I'd like to think of create new knowledge, create, what am I trying to say? I see the potential of students to be productive, as I said earlier in the presentation, not just empty vessels waiting to be filled, but we can actually, because there is so much knowledge out there, we can actually get our students to work towards being productive rather than just regurgitating information.
I totally agree. I've seen too much of it myself. And I also agree with your comment on learning forums. Previously I was at QUT in Australia, and I ditched all learning forums from my course. I ditched all lectures probably about 6-7 years ago.
Yes, good.
I just, these sorts of things, we need to understand why we're trying to do something, and I think that's the problem. A lot of people don't understand why they're doing something. I did a survey in the beginning of COVID, I was telling Karen, who's with me here, I did a survey in the beginning of COVID in Norway, and students over 6 weeks had to learn 23 different software tools in the beginning of COVID. And I don't know about you, but I'd be feeling pretty damn overwhelmed if I was a student. And this is the sort of thing. This is the sort of thing I talk about with digital technologies. We need to use them as a tool in clever ways, and we need to have not the same approach, but consistent approaches that take into account the students' needs and well-being as well.
Wonderful. I've just got my dogs in the background barking their heads off.
I wish my dog was here and barking. Listen, I don't have any more. It was really lovely to hear what you had to say, and lovely to see a lot of my ideas reinforced, that I wasn't just doing silly things out there. Did you have a question?
Not at all. Sounds great.
Is there any question? That's all. I don't think there's any other questions, but wonderful presentation.
Thank
I'm
you.
definitely going to have a read of your paper that you suggest there when I get a chance. Too many things to cover in higher education, too many things still to be done.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Okay.
No worries. Thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye.